I didn't expect to be part of something this big when I first signed on with NASA. I imagined the usual work, long nights staring at screens, analysing data, and perhaps discovering a few new stars or distant galaxies. It was all supposed to be routine, but nothing in my wildest dreams prepared me for what we found. The year was 2041, and the space station I worked on, the Perseus, was orbiting a newly discovered exoplanet. My job was relatively simple: observe, collect data, and assist with simulations. I'd spent my time working with a small team of researchers, sifting through the endless sea of information, knowing we were on the cusp of something monumental. I had no idea how true that statement would become. The breakthrough happened one evening when Dr. Elijah Klein, one of the leading physicists at NASA, sent an urgent message. His words were simple but clear. "Meet me in the lab now." Klein was an eccentric genius with a reputation for diving into the unknown. If something new came up, he was the first to investigate. That evening, he wasn't joking around. When I arrived at his lab, the room was darker than usual, illuminated only by the dim glow of several large screens showing complex, swirling data patterns. He barely looked up as I entered. "Do you see it?" he asked without preamble, his voice tight. I walked over to his console, squinting at the data. It was a live feed from one of the most advanced telescopes we had, the Horizon Array. The images were grainy but clear enough to reveal something strange, something that shouldn't exist. A massive anomaly was appearing at the edge of the observable universe. It wasn't a star. It wasn't a black hole. It was something else. I leaned in closer, my mind racing. The readings made no sense. There was an immense gravitational pull at the edge of this anomaly, far beyond anything we had ever seen. A mass that shouldn't have been there. Something that was blocking the normal flow of space and time. "Is this possible?" I asked. Klein didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled up a series of simulations, thousands of models, each one analysing the same thing from different angles. The results were clear. Whatever it was real, but the implications were terrifying. "This," Klein said slowly, "is something we've never seen before. It's pulling at the very fabric of space itself." The tension in the room was palpable. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck rise. For the first time in my life, I truly understood the meaning of the word unfathomable. "We've got to tell someone," I whispered, unsure if I meant NASA or the entire world. "No," Klein snapped, his voice sharp. "We can't. Not yet. I don't know what we're looking at, but I have a theory. And if I'm right..." He didn't finish the thought. Instead, he pressed a few buttons on his console and pulled up a schematic. The diagram was of the known universe, the cosmic microwave background radiation that had been mapped for decades. But now there was a dark spot, a region that didn't align with anything in the observable universe. "This," Klein pointed at the spot on the map, "is where the anomaly is. It's not just at the edge of our observable universe. It's outside of it. It's beyond everything we know. And I think it's alive." I stared at him in disbelief. Alive? It sounded absurd, but something in his eyes told me that Klein was more than just speculative. There was a quiet terror behind his words, a fear of something that had yet to fully reveal itself. We stared at the screen for what felt like hours, trapped in the gravity of that unknown force. Finally, Klein spoke again. This time, his voice barely a whisper. "We have to send a probe." I wasn't the only one who found Klein's suggestion terrifying. As the weeks passed, we debated the decision in hushed tones, surrounded by screens and the cold, sterile atmosphere of the space station. There was something fundamentally wrong about exploring this anomaly, this thing at the edge of everything. Sending a probe felt like tempting fate, but Klein was insistent. His obsession with the unknown had overtaken any rational concern. He wanted to understand it, to know what lay beyond the edge of the observable universe. Finally, after endless meetings and discussions with the higher-ups at NASA, the decision was made. We would send a probe to the anomaly. The probe was specially designed, the Odyssey 9. It was the most advanced piece of technology we had ever built, equipped with AI capable of independent decision-making, and a range of sensors unlike anything ever deployed in space. But even with all of its advanced capabilities, the mission felt doomed from the start. There was something about it, the overwhelming sense of wrongness, that gnawed at the back of my mind. Launch day came, and the entire station held its breath. The Odyssey 9 was launched from the Perseus with a small but determined crew watching its progress. The probe sped towards the anomaly, its trajectory plotted with precision. Days turned into weeks. The excitement over the launch quickly gave way to nervous anticipation. We monitored the Odyssey 9's progress around the clock. It was supposed to be routine, just another probe sent out to collect data. But every time we received a transmission, something felt off. The probe began picking up strange signals. Not just simple data transmissions, but something more. At first, we thought it was a glitch in the system, but as the signals continued, we realized they were too structured, too deliberate. They were almost purposeful. One night, as I sat in the control room, the signal intensified. It was rhythmic, like a pulse. My heart raced as I looked at Klein, who stood beside me, his face pale. "We need to decode this," Klein said. "It's trying to communicate with us." And so we did. Hours passed, and the signal grew stronger. Then, finally, the breakthrough came. The signal wasn't random. It was a pattern, a sequence of numbers and symbols that resembled nothing we had ever encountered before. "What is it?" I asked, my voice trembling. Klein didn't answer immediately. His eyes were wide, his hands shaking, as he typed furiously into the console. "It's not from this universe," he whispered. The moment Klein said those words, I felt a chill run down my spine. The idea that there could be something from beyond the universe, something outside the bounds of space and time, was too much to comprehend. But the more we analysed the signal, the more it became clear. This was no simple message. It was a warning. The message from the edge of the universe was like nothing we had ever seen. The symbols were alien, their meanings unfathomable. But as we began to decode them, one word kept repeating over and over: fear. The signal wasn't just a message, it was a warning. We didn't know what it meant. What was it warning us about? What was out there, at the edge of everything? And then, without warning, the Odyssey 9 sent back one final transmission before it went silent. The data it transmitted was incomprehensible, twisted and malformed. But the last image it sent was clear. A vast, incomprehensible shape, dark, infinite, reaching out with tendrils that defied all logic, all physics. It was an entity, if you could even call it that. It seemed to be made of pure nothingness, yet it emanated a presence so powerful, so malevolent, that it overwhelmed everything around it. And then the signal stopped. The Odyssey 9 had disappeared. Klein's voice broke the silence. "We're not alone." It was then that I understood. Whatever was out there beyond the edge of the universe was not just a part of reality. It was something else entirely. Something ancient. Something hungry. And it was coming for us. The silence that followed the disappearance of the Odyssey 9 was suffocating. It wasn't just the loss of the probe that chilled me. It was the realization that we had opened a door to something we couldn't understand. And worse, something we couldn't control. Back at NASA's headquarters on Earth, the pressure mounted. Our discovery had spread through the ranks like wildfire. The image from the Odyssey 9, though grainy and distorted, had been leaked to higher authorities, and the top brass were now aware of the implications. We were no longer just scientists trying to explore space. We were witnesses to something far more sinister, something beyond the scope of human comprehension. "Dr. Klein!" The voice of General Harper crackled over the secure line. "We need answers, now." I sat in the command center with Klein as we listened to the General's demand. The weight of the situation hung heavily in the air. There was no turning back. Whatever was out there, we had just made contact with it. And now, the military wanted answers. Answers they had no right to ask for. Klein's hands trembled as he keyed in a few commands on his terminal. He had been quiet for too long, and I could tell he was struggling to come to terms with the horrors that the Odyssey 9 had uncovered. I wasn't sure he even had any answers anymore. "We've been trying to decipher the signals," Klein replied, his voice strained. "But the data, it doesn't make sense. This entity, this thing, is not from our universe. It's not even made of matter, as we understand it. It's something other. And the last transmission we received, it's almost like it was aware of us." General Harper's voice boomed through the speakers, more insistent this time. "Dr. Klein, I don't think you understand the gravity of this situation. Whatever this thing is, it poses a threat to national security. We need to launch a full-scale investigation, and we need to prepare for the worst." Klein's face paled even further. He stared at the screen, his fingers hovering over the console. "We don't know what we're dealing with, General. If we engage with it further, we could provoke it. And from what we've seen, that's a mistake none of us can afford to make." But General Harper was relentless. "I don't care what you think, Klein. Prepare a team. You'll head back to the Perseus in 48 hours. We need to know everything, or we'll take over the operation." The line went dead. I turned to Klein, who was now visibly shaking. His obsession with the anomaly had crossed into something darker, something more dangerous. It was as if the signal had infected him, twisting his mind the way it twisted the data. "Are you sure we're doing the right thing?" I asked quietly. He didn't respond for a long time, and when he finally did, his voice was hollow. "There is no right thing anymore. We're already too far gone." 2 days later, we found ourselves back aboard the Perseus. The tension was palpable, not just among the research team, but within the entire station. The crew was on edge, whispering in corners, casting nervous glances at the monitors. We had all felt it, the weight of our discovery pressing down on us, suffocating us in a way no space station ever should. NASA had assembled a team of military experts, including engineers, physicists, and even a few cryptographers, to assist with analysing the signals we had received. They were a hard-nosed bunch, more concerned with the practicality of our mission than the existential terror that lingered in the background. But as we approached the edge of the universe once more, the air seemed to thicken. The anomaly, the thing out there, felt closer somehow. It wasn't just a distant problem anymore. It was here, in the deepest parts of space, and it was watching us. "We're at the coordinates," Klein announced, his voice shaky as he stood before the observation window. Beyond the station's glass, the darkness of space stretched infinitely. But there, at the very edge, something moved. A distortion. A ripple in the fabric of the universe. The anomaly was no longer just a point in space. It was alive, and it was reaching towards us. Klein activated the probe again. "Let's see if we can get another read. Maybe this time we can decipher more." The Odyssey 9 sensors buzzed to life once more, its long-range cameras focusing on the distortion at the edge of the universe. For a moment, everything seemed calm. Too calm. Then, the first sign of something wrong appeared. A deep, vibrating hum. "It's sending a signal," said one of the engineers, his face pale as he checked the readings. I leaned in, watching the data streams with growing unease. The hum grew louder, more insistent, as though the entity were trying to communicate, or perhaps demanding our attention. The air in the command center grew cold, a bone-chilling drop in temperature that made the hairs on my neck stand up. The hum stopped abruptly. There was a pause, then, all at once, the lights in the station flickered. "System malfunction," shouted one of the technicians. But Klein wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the data on his screen. "It's happening again. It's reaching out." And then everything went black. When the lights flickered back to life, we found ourselves in total chaos. Systems were failing, communication lines were down, and worst of all, the anomaly had intensified. The shape outside the station was no longer just a ripple in space. It was expanding, growing, like some monstrous eye opening in the depths of the universe. I could feel its gaze upon us, even through the thick glass of the observation deck. The crew scrambled to regain control of the station, but it was as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling around us. The edges of the universe weren't just distant anymore. They were here, pressing in on us, warping space itself. Klein's voice broke through the chaos. "It's not just a force, it's alive." I turned to him, my heart racing. "What are you saying? What is it?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for a terminal, pulling up the last set of data from the Odyssey 9. The probe had captured something we hadn't noticed before, a series of distorted images. But they weren't random. They formed a shape, a structure, something that shouldn't exist in the fabric of space. "We've been reading it all wrong," Klein said slowly. "It's not a void, it's a consciousness." I stared at him in horror. "A consciousness?" "Yes," Klein whispered, "and it's aware of us. We're intruders in its domain." As his words sank in, something far worse became clear. The entity we had encountered was not simply an alien force. It was something older, something far more malevolent. It had been there long before the universe as we knew it even began. And now it had found us. A flash of light exploded outside the observation window, and I saw it, closer than ever. The void at the edge of the universe had opened fully, revealing something even darker, even more incomprehensible than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just a force in space, it was a being, and it was reaching into our reality. The ship trembled as if it were caught in the grip of something vast, something beyond our understanding. Every system on the Perseus was being tested, no strained, as if the very fabric of reality around us was being twisted and pulled by some unfathomable force. I felt an overwhelming pull, a strange compulsion, as if something was calling to me from beyond the station. I wasn't the only one. The crew members were moving erratically, their eyes wide and glazed, as though they were hearing a voice they couldn't ignore. The hum was back, low and constant, reverberating through the metal walls, vibrating in our bones. The distortion outside was growing. It was no longer a mere ripple in space, but a vortex, a dark whirlpool that seemed to suck the light from the surrounding stars, bending space and time into an unnatural spiral. The glass of the observation deck, which had once been clear, now distorted like water, making everything outside look like a smudged painting, moving, writhing, yet somehow still there. "We have to stop this," someone screamed. It was one of the engineers, his face pale with terror. He grabbed at the console, trying to regain control, but the data was spiraling into chaos. Whatever had once been orderly, the patterns, the readings, even the language of the universe, had turned into gibberish. It's breaking everything," Klein whispered, his face contorted in confusion and fear. His hands shook violently as he stared at the screen. "It's not just a force, it's warping space and time. It's pulling apart the laws of physics themselves." But what chilled me to my core wasn't Klein's analysis. It was the knowledge that we were now completely at the mercy of whatever was on the other side of that rift. The station groaned, its hull creaking, as if it were being stretched beyond its limits. The gravity fluctuated in strange pulses, lifting us off the ground in jerks, and I had to fight to keep my footing. And then the voice came. It wasn't like any sound I'd ever heard before. It didn't come from any speakers or transmitters. It was inside our minds, deep in our skulls, like a cold whisper threading through our consciousness. It was a language that transcended everything we understood. Yet the message was somehow clear. "You have trespassed." The voice was low and guttural, resonating with a terrifying authority. It wasn't a single voice, but a chorus of countless distorted whispers. "You have disturbed the Ancient One." I collapsed to my knees, clutching my head as the whispers grew louder. Around me, I saw the crew doing the same, clawing at their ears, shaking, their faces contorted in agony. But even though the voice was inside our minds, it was undeniable. It was coming from beyond the rift. The thing was speaking to us. "We need to leave," I gasped, my breath shallow, as the pressure in the room grew unbearable. The temperature had dropped so low that I could see my breath in front of me, the chill seeping into my bones. It felt as though the very air was being drained away. But no one was listening. Klein was still at the console, his eyes wide and unfocused. "It's too late," he murmured, his voice distant and lost. "We can't run from it. It's here." In the midst of the chaos, I saw something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Through the distortion, through the darkness outside, something moved. A shape. A massive, impossible figure. Its form so enormous that it made the station feel insignificant. It stretched across the rift, its tendrils coiling and writhing like the fingers of a god. Its presence was suffocating, its sheer magnitude overwhelming. It was as if it was reaching into the station itself, pulling at the walls, at the very structure of our reality. The blackness outside had shifted into something alive, something aware of us, a presence so immense that it transcended space. It had found us. We tried to fight it, of course. Human instinct dictates that we resist, even when we know the odds are impossible. The military team aboard the Perseus scrambled to respond, activating every defense system available. But it was hopeless. Whatever this entity was, it didn't need our weapons. It didn't even need to touch us. I watched as the first wave of defense systems went live. The laser grids, the electromagnetic pulses meant to disrupt anything that didn't belong. But the beams of energy that should have struck the rift harmlessly were absorbed, twisted, and devoured in an instant. The entity, if you could even call it that, didn't just block them. It consumed them, the energy fading into its darkness, as if it was nothing more than a snack. "They're useless," Klein said quietly, his voice tinged with a hopelessness I had never heard from him before. "The laws of our universe, our understanding of physics, they don't apply anymore." I felt a coldness creep into my heart. Klein wasn't just talking about the defense systems. He was talking about everything. Everything. The world we knew, the science we had so painstakingly uncovered over centuries, it didn't mean a thing anymore. There was no way to fight this. There was no way to stop it. And that was when we realized the truth. The entity had been waiting for us. It had known we would come. It had allowed us to stumble upon the edge of the universe, giving us just enough rope to hang ourselves. And now it was going to finish what it had started. The end of humanity wasn't going to be the result of an asteroid, or war, or even climate change. It would be something older, something more primal than any of us had ever imagined. "We've made a mistake," Klein whispered, his voice barely audible. "This isn't just an entity from another dimension. This is something older than the universe itself, something that existed before time." My head spun as I tried to process what he was saying, but the answer was already becoming clear. The entity, the one that had spoken to us, the one that had shown itself in the rift. It wasn't just an alien being. It was something that had existed before the universe, something beyond space and time. I looked at the rift again, the place where it had begun. The edges were shifting now, the darkness pulsing as if it were breathing. And I realized, with a sickening twist in my stomach, that the entity wasn't just observing us anymore. It was moving. The final descent came swiftly. There were no heroic moments, no last-minute solutions, no great speeches. There was only the overwhelming presence of the entity, closing in on us like a wave of darkness. The Perseus was nothing more than a speck of dust in the vast cosmic ocean. The crew was panicking now, screaming, trying to escape, trying to reach the escape pods, but there were no escape routes. Every passage was warped, every door malfunctioning. The fabric of reality itself was coming undone, and we were trapped in its wake. Klein, his face a mask of anguish, turned to me. "We've already lost. It's already here." And then, as the final breach in the station's hull began to tear apart the metal walls, I understood what he meant. The rift wasn't just a gateway to another universe. It was a gate, a door for something far more terrifying. And as it opened, the final truth became clear. It wasn't just reaching into our universe. It was pulling us into its own. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed us completely was the rift, expanding, swallowing the Perseus, and with it everything we had ever known.